continuidade, o encerramento também da nossa Semana de Políticas Públicas Internacionais, com essa conferência na presença de duas convidadas brilhantes, que já eu vou apresentar a vocês. E esperamos que, na sequência, a gente mantenha o nível de engajamento e participação que tem marcado a nossa Semana de Políticas Públicas Internacionais, desde as oficinas, que vêm sendo conduzidas desde a quarta-feira, as oficinas de extensão, os momentos de exposição, que esse seja o nosso propósito, mais um momento de bastante troca, de bastante interação. Então, eu tenho ao meu lado nossas duas convidadas, primeiramente, Marie-Cécile Naves, doutora em Ciência Política pela Universidade Paris-Dauphine. Ela escreveu uma dúzia de livros sobre os Estados Unidos, especialmente sobre os conservadores americanos, além de obras sobre feminismo e igualdade de gênero. Antes de atuar como assessora do gabinete de Najat Vallaud-Belkacem, no Ministério Francês da Educação Nacional, Ensino Superior e Pesquisa, entre 2015 e 2017, trabalhou como gerente de projetos na France Stratégie, antiga Comissão do Plano, entre 2010 e 2015. Nesse período, coescreveu e supervisionou diversos relatórios para o governo francês e para o presidente da República, especialmente sobre estereótipos de gênero na infância e na adolescência. Livros mais recentes, Géopolitique des États-Unis, de 2025, Géopolitique de Feminisme, 2023, Calmez-vous, Madame, Ça va bien se passer, 2023, La démocratie féministe, réinventer le pouvoir, de 2020. Também, na sequência, teremos o prazer de ouvir Julie Maraval, Adida de Cooperação da Embaixada da França no Brasil, atua como Adida de Cooperação na Embaixada da França em Brasília, onde também assume a importante função de referente pela igualdade da Embaixada, promovendo a política francesa de diplomacia feminista. Com 2 décadas de atuação, já trabalhou na Ásia, Europa e Américas, na área de cooperação, defesa dos direitos humanos e na promoção da igualdade de gênero. Então, em nome da coordenação do Departamento de Relações Internacionais da PUC-Rio, quero agradecer calorosamente as nossas convidadas por estarem aqui conosco no contexto da nossa Semana de Políticas Públicas Internacionais. E sem muitas delongas, eu passo a palavra para Marie-Cécile.
Thank you very much. Will it work? Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you for your invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you today. Sorry, I don't speak Portuguese, but one day maybe. Who knows? I'm going to talk to you in English. I was asked to talk about gender policies across multiple levels, the French experience in feminist diplomacy. So we are going to talk about that. First of all, I would like to begin with the concept of gender policies. There is no academic or a priori definition of it, but what are we talking about when we talk about gender? Gender in the academic field and in the political field also is at the same time a concept, a field work in research, in the social sciences, of course, but also in medicine, digital policies, geopolitics, health, etc. It's not an academic discipline as such. It's rather a cross-cutting concept that you can use in many disciplines. It's also a methodological tool to understand the reality. So fieldwork in research, a concept and a methodological tool. It is, of course, about women's rights, but also all issues of the political and geopolitical agenda. You can use it in education, in health, in war issues, in conflict resolution, in environment, of course, economy, culture, sports, whatever. So it's very useful, very interesting. And it means put on gender-conscious glasses, as we say in French. Chausser les lunettes du genre. Put on gender-conscious glasses. I don't know if in your country you can say the same, but in French it's very often used as such. Not only because gender is key to understand what public policies do to women and girls, but also to men and boys, and sometimes very differently. Not only because of that, but also to open the perspective. How far are some politics implemented in such a way as to destroy ecosystems and people? What if vulnerability be considered as a valuable political topic? What would be the impacts of changing international perspectives when you use the gender-conscious perspective? If you have such a perspective, you understand better what is going on and how to act more efficiently in the world. Decision makers are like many people, probably us, probably me also. They are used to see the world through a certain point of view. If you forget that half of migrants in the world are women, if you forget that gender violence is a continuum that impacts dozens of millions of lives, if you neglect the fact that peace building is a long process which demands to implement justice and then to rely on field know-how and social links that are most of the time possible mainly through women, you cannot have long-term peace. Such an example among many others. So governments, private companies, and individuals also who fight deliberately against women's rights are at the same time people who fight against people's rights in general. They are against knowledge, science, education. They are against democracy. They want people to stay in their place, to fix people's identities that they, not you, have defined at the beginning, a priori. And those who hate gender-conscious approaches are the main gender-conscious people. Kind of definition of gender policy. And what is feminist diplomacy? It's not what's in the margins. It's not, as we say in French, a supplément d'âme, something that is not important, that you care about only if you have time left. It's not branding either. It's not a word that is only used to communicate that you have done things very well. There is no pre-existing definition of feminist diplomacy. In some countries, it has been implemented some time ago. It's the case of France since 2019. The French government, and also with researchers, NGOs, citizens, have strived to insert feminism in diplomacy. First, through the feminization of staff, ambassadors, high and middle management, etc. But also in codes, the way you talk, the way you behave in meetings, your leadership, and also in documentation, resources, and of course in the agenda. Agenda means in political science, the program programmatic perspective. So promoting gender equality in the staffs means first equity and justice. This is the first goal, of course. But it's also relying on various expertise and skills that you risk to get rid of if you don't have a gender-conscious perspective. Breaking endogamy is very important. Why? Because endogamy is a terrible thing. Endogamy means you never doubt. You never question certitudes. You never challenge yourselves. So, I personally do not belong to the French foreign ministry, but I sometimes work with staff, and I have for more than 20 years, 15 years, have been participating in the building and the implementation of public policies in education, research, and gender equality. And as a researcher, I am regularly invited to co-write notes and reports in the parliament or in ministries, and as you said, for some French governments and former President of the Republic, François Hollande. And such reports and notes give food for thought when laws are written and voted. It's complicated perspective, but you know, things are shared, ideas are shared, and they infuse in society and in ideas in government and in ministries. Gender equality and a gender-conscious approach of education was a cross-cutting concern when I was an advisor of the foreign minister. It was about 10 years ago. And when you have this cross-cutting perspective in all the public policy that you want to implement, you don't forget what is at stake, and you act for all people. You don't act only for girls and women, you act for common good, and you act for everyone. This is very interesting. Recently, I was invited in the French Senate and Assembly, in the two chambers of the parliament in France, to share my research about what I would call toxic masculinity, not only online. It is an issue you have probably heard about and you are probably involved in some ways. But also, not only online, but it's also an issue in health, in education, and in sports, notably in the US today. And I am currently writing a book on masculinism, let's say toxic masculinity or virilism, or there is no canonic definition of it, but you know, it's ongoing work in progress. So I'm currently co-writing a book on masculinism as a geopolitical weapon with a colleague of mine who is specialized in Russian politics. So we share our perspectives from the US, European, and Russian point of view. Today, a feminist diplomacy, I would say, is confronted with some challenges. First one, I would say, is haters. Not only people and governments, and also companies, who believe that we, I don't know who is we, but we, as people who work for women's rights, we, according to them, have been too far with women's rights and girls' rights. Not only those people, but also people who want to destroy women's and minorities' rights. Not only to go back, to put the clock back, but to destroy the rights. It's not exactly the same. Even though the people they target will die. Ending abortion rights means ending health access. it's not only theoretical, what I say here, it's practical. We can see it concretely in the United States, for example, but not only. Ending anti-discrimination policies in the workplace means preventing people from finding a job or keeping it. It's very concrete. Deregulating artificial intelligence and algorithms means harassing women and silencing them, preventing them from working, preventing them from existing in the public sphere, but also harassing them and encouraging other people to be violent against them and their families. Predatory capitalism. Predatory capitalism is a phrase I use, and others use it also. It's not a idiomatic phrase, but it's something that you can understand, I suppose. Predatory capitalism today is particularly misogynistic. And they theatralize it. They don't hide it. They are proud of it. So this is the first challenge I would say a feminist diplomacy is confronted with. The second one, another example, is the coherence of public policy. Coherence of public policies is one of my obsessions. And it's not very original, but the fact that you do something in a certain field of public policy, and you do something else in another field, and they are contradictory with each other. Not because people don't agree with one another, but because depending on the ministry, depending on the minister, you have various priorities. Today in France and in many countries all over the world, but in France and in Europe in particular, the main goal of the government is how to find money, how to save money. So when you implement public policies that demand funding, of course, that demand long-term view, to think about the long-run perspective, it's a problem when the President of the Republic or the Prime Minister or the Minister says, no, we have to, the Minister of Economy, say, no, we have to save money. So your long-term policies, you have to forget about it because it costs too much. Okay, but it's contradictory with what you have promised to do for the most vulnerable people, for foreign policy, etc. So the coherence of public policies, I would say, is the main challenge, but it's not specific to the topic we are talking about today. It's more general. And the third challenge, I would say, for feminist diplomacy tomorrow is, and it's my personal opinion, but doesn't mean that it's stupid, but it doesn't mean that it's intelligent either, is visibility and invisibility. Diplomacy is mainly secret. It's culture, but it's also its strength. Do things secret. But today we live in a world full of communication, of visibility. And if you don't talk about something, many people, many stakeholders consider that it doesn't exist. It's false, it's right, but it's a general impression. So maybe it's a kind of challenge that we are confronted with when we do feminist diplomacy. And in terms of perspectives, a feminist conscious approach of the world remains key, and perhaps it has never been more key than today and tomorrow. Feminism, or should I say feminisms, because there are many feminisms in the world, and also within one country as such. In France, you have many kinds of feminisms. They don't agree with each other all the time, and it's good news. Because when people always agree with each other, this is a fascist society. When people disagree, but can talk with each other, but can discuss, can have conversations, it's good news. When everybody agrees with each other, it's not good news. It's not a democratic society. Feminisms change lives for the better, not only women's and girls' lives, but everybody's lives. It allies knowledge, scientific, activist, citizen knowledge. First, acknowledgement of competencies, of skills, and political involvement. Political involvement can take many faces. In society, in your family, in your community, in votes, in participating in decision making, etc. There's a kind of prejudice in democracies today, maybe it's the case in your country, that people are done with politics. I don't agree with that. I think people are not at all done with politics. They don't always agree with the governments or the president. They don't want to vote because they say it won't change my life, etc. But they are not done with politics. And in France today, as we are about, well, we have a presidential and probably legislative elections in less than 1 year. What I can see is that people, citizens, and also young people, also very young people in high school, for example, are particularly interested in geopolitics. When we do conferences, when we do seminars with people in high school, young people, common citizens, all over France, it's full. People are very interested in such issues. They are interested, of course, in wars, in conflict resolutions, and at the time when strong men consider themselves as the most competent and everywhere is the chaos. And of course, people are interested and concerned with crisis, health crisis, environmental crisis, social crisis, democratic crisis, and all these crises are intertwined. So it's not true that people are done with politics and they are not interested in such issues. Another point that is a prejudice and a false prejudice is that empathy is lost. Empathy is old-fashioned. Empathy, Elon Musk said, is democracy's bug. Democracy's bug is empathy. In one sentence, you can see what this thing can think about human rights and people. I believe this is the contrary. We do not like violence. We do not like predation. We do not like selfishness. So tomorrow, from a geopolitical perspective, it seems that, and today and tomorrow, it seems like global alliances inherited from World War II change quickly and are going to change very quickly, more quickly tomorrow. And tomorrow, because of that, notably because of that, the feminist diplomacy should be strategic to have more strength, to have more influence, to have more impact. Not to say that it doesn't have any impact today, that's the contrary. But to have more impact, we have to, I suppose, have that idea in mind. So this strategy, what does it mean? It means that we should demand, not ask, but demand, that women's, children's, minorities' rights be a top priority of all geopolitical negotiations. We should, when I say we, it's all of us who are interested in these topics, you as the decision makers of tomorrow, or as researchers or as stakeholders in such issues. We should also demand that be implemented an impact assessment of every feminist policy, every gender conscious policy. What about the fifth LDG? What about the fifth SDG? What has happened to this main objective of the 2030 agenda? We don't talk about it any longer, but still, yeah. And this SDG talks about equal opportunities for girls and women. We must also, and it's particularly the case in young generations, but not only, we should also explain, describe, say what anti-feminism does to society. And there are resources to do it. We can measure, we can see, we can document it. What does anti-feminism do to societies? Not only to women and girls, but also to minorities, to people who are seen as vulnerable, people who don't belong to the main definition of masculinity, of toxic masculinity. Everyone. We should also make feminist know-how and successes, be they local or national, known all over the world. Yesterday, we had a very interesting session all the day at the French consulate about local experiences, local feminist experiences. And you see that women hold the world together, hold societies together, including in autocratic countries, maybe mostly in autocratic societies and countries. So we should, in my view, have a strategy of virality, aggressive communication, aggressive in the good meaning, of course, not in insulting and violence against others, no, of course not, but active, I say active communication, make noise, demonstrations, etc. In other words, let's be inevitable with a positive narrative that can convince also people who are not already convinced, and they are, of course, numerous, but they can be convinced if we adapt the narrative to them. Well, not everybody agrees with that, but it's a point of view that I like to put forward. Wars between feminist expertise and public decision-making must continue to fall. And it's not easy. When we talk about academic expertise, NGO expertise, common people expertise, it's difficult to make those expertise, those knowledge, meet with public decision-making and public decision-makers. It's difficult, but it's possible. So we should not neglect gender mainstreaming, even if it's not perfect. You know, anti-rights movements do not agree on everything with each other, but they share the same goal: destroy lives, destroy the rights, not only women and girls' rights, but also people's rights, women's rights. Sorry for insisting about that, but when you destroy the rights of some people, it's the first step towards destroying everybody's rights in the future. And also, we should continue to demand money and cross-cutting policies in governments and international organizations and those together. And to finish, because there are many young people in front of me, don't neglect to vote. I mean, all the ladies saying that, I'm sorry about that, because, well, I know it can be ridiculous or old-fashioned to you, but it's very important to vote, even though you don't always agree with all that the political parties propose. But if you don't vote, your adversaries will. And when they win, they implement the agenda they promised to implement. So let's leave the margins for the center. Paraphrase bell hooks, and thank you.
Obrigado. Thank you, Marie-Cécile. Passo a palavra, Julie Maraval.
Thank you. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Julie, advocate at the French Embassy in Brasilia. I will speak a mixture of Portuguese and English. First things coming to my mind, sorry. As an introduction word, I would like to say I'm very happy to be here and very happy that we have a mixed audience. It's the first time in my life ever that we're talking about women's rights and feminist diplomacy with an audience that is a good mix of men and women, boys and girls. So thank you all of them to be here. It's very unusual, trust me, saying it's very pleasant, honestly. One quick question before we start, because I would not like to tell you things that you already know. So can you please just raise your hands if you already heard before about what is a feminist diplomacy? Those who, unless what Marie-Cécile said, before her intervention, who already heard or had a lecture or read a book about feminist diplomacy, just so I'm a minority, let's say, so we will not be repeating and hopefully you will learn something. So as I said, I work at the French Embassy. I am a cooperation attaché, that means implementing cooperation programs with NGOs, generally Brazilian NGOs, and institutional cooperation also. For instance, with NRP or with judges, we provide them for a trip to France where they will exchange with their counterparts, judges, high-level officials, etc. And I am also French pela igualdade, como o Tiago falou. This means that to implement our French feminist diplomacy, it was decided a few years ago that all the embassies would have a reference focal point to not supervise, but to help promote the agenda. So our French diplomacy is on has two aspects, the internal aspects and the external aspects. So we do not neglect both of them. That means to promote external policies, feminist external policies. We also believe that we need more female executives and staff in the ministry. So this first internal part, we have a professional equality strategy, for instance, some quotas to help promote female ambassadors. We have an obligation to make training on sexual violence, harassment, all this kind of sensitization. And the external part would be, to promote women's rights everywhere in all the fields. So, of course, cooperation, but also basic multilateral and bilateral cooperation. And also in our consular activities, which is a new development. Concretely, if you are a French woman living abroad, who can you talk to if you are a victim in your own family, if you are a victim of violence, domestic violence. And for instance, your husband is also working at the military department at the French embassy. Who would you talk to? Just an example. So this has been a new development. So really with our French diplomacy that we adopted in 2019, the idea was really to put the heart of our external action, the promotion of women's rights and equality, gender equality. So in bilateral, multilateral, consular affairs, and in all the fields like cultural, economic cooperation, military cooperation, climate change, so all the topics. Because as it was said, it's a matter of rights, so we have a strong human rights approach. And also it is said to have a better productivity. I don't know, better efficiency, I don't know, but we really want to promote this human rights approach. Also because it's not just a matter of women, as it was said, all this kind of policy and gender equality has been proved that it also benefits to men, and it's a program that we want to implement with all the men colleagues. Also, it's not made for women, by women, etc. It's really for the interests of both sex, and also it is implemented by all the colleagues, not only the female colleagues, obviously. And it has been also demonstrated that when you open the door to more women, it's also opening the door to more diversity. So how do I say, non-cis person, people with disability, people with different colors of skin, etc., different background, also different schools. They all not come from proper Paris schools for rich white people, let's say, basically. So this is the idea of the diplomacy feminist. We didn't invent that. The Swedes promoted first in 2014, even though since then they were not that vocal in promoting feminist policies. But more countries are adopting this policy. Every year there is a international conference of the feminist diplomacies with different efficiency, let's say, depending on the years. It's a concept we are struggling, with this context of backlash that was mentioned. It is really not easy every day. It's a tough job to promote women's rights in this context at the moment, to the point that sometimes we are a bit reluctant to have those conferences because we don't know if the result would be an advancement in the rights or maybe backlash. So it is, we're in this situation. Some other countries are really imposing the narratives, and we are, depending on who is the leader of our country, sometimes we fight strongly, sometimes we're just trying to resist passively. So it is a tough context. So just to give you some concrete examples of what we do at the embassy where I work. As I said, it's very political and concrete in cooperation. So for instance, every time we have an high official coming and visit and have a meeting with your Minister of Foreign Affairs, for instance, we try to have a feminist diplomacy moment. We would invite NGOs, we can invite a representative from the Ministry of Women, or invite, I don't know if you know her, that in the Itamaraty, you have high officials for gender promotion. And so we would also invite her to talk about the situation, women's rights in the country. And we've learned a lot because our French perspective is really we say that it's kind of universal. We don't make a difference whether you're white or black or indigenous or not. And here I have learned a lot because every time we talk about igualdade de gênero, tem que ver com igualdade racial também. Isso na França não existe. Não, não porque não temos outras cores, mas porque it's a matter of the constitution. We don't have ethnic statistics. We pretend we all universal, we all the same. The idea at the moment, maybe it was a good idea, comes from the revolution times, that we would all be equal, so we don't have any difference. And here we learn a lot because we can always see that intersectionality is not something that we ignore in France, but it's much more concrete. And this is something I have learned. And I think every time we have a high officials coming here, they are surprised. Talk about black and white. Oh, that's very weird for us. But yes, this is it's a reality for us. It's a concept. So this is one of the first examples, high level meetings talking about women's rights. Another one is in the forms of the events we promote. For instance, we technically, officially, we would not accept to intervene in a panel where there are only men Palestrans. We will not follow that. We try to have a mixed panel, mixed point of view. This is the idea. Also promoting projects in the cultural field, for instance, that are not only with male director or with male artists, etc. And communicating about all the main events, like campaign for activism against domestic violence, of course, Days of March, but also the against homophobia, etc. And then in the more concrete projects, then since I have this position of cooperation attaché and reference technical focal point for equality, I try to promote in the project that we found, I try to concretely promote women's rights. So in the Roraima, Amazonas, for instance, we have a program to fund, to build capacities of nurses and doctors on how to put DUI as a contraception methods, or education on sexuality, or help promote a network of women who would like to be candidates in the next local elections. For instance, or we launched also a concours with schools that we work with in the field of cooperation in education, a concours on how to fight gender stereotypes. We have a strong program with NRP to train women high executives on liderança feminina, assim. So that is roughly some examples I wanted to talk about. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Obrigado, Julie. Bom, agora eu abro para as perguntas, né? A gente pode coletar em bloco algumas perguntas. Então, a primeira rodada, eu fiz Isabela, professor Diego.
Hello, great. Hello, my name is Isabelle. I'm really grateful that you guys are here. I think it's so important to talk about gender, especially in international relations. And my question is surrounding the topic of visibility that you guys talked about so much. I think it's really important to understand how we as international relations students, and will work with international relations in the future, how we on our day-to-day can deal with the fact of anti-feminism and toxic masculinity. because I think that those concepts really narrow the concept of feminism. They really say like, oh yeah, women hate men and they don't want men around, and that's why they kind of ignore feminist diplomacy. So I want to ask that. So why do you think, how do you think we can deal with that on our day-to-day?
Hello, my name is Diego. I'm an IR lecturer here with you. And my question is, what is the role of Global South feminists in this debate? Because you said that there are a lot of disagreements, there are a lot of differences among different perspectives of feminism, but it looks like for me that we are talking about Eurocentric, North Atlantic feminist perspectives. And we are debating here feminist diplomacy in France. And we can see that in France, we have a lot of Black women, Latin American women, African women, Asian women, trans women. Are their voices really heard? Do they have some kind of participation in this debate? Because it still looks like, for me, something that is extremely concentrated in Eurocentric and North Atlantic perspectives. And when we read, and when we hear something like this from a feminist perspective, from the norm, from the global norm, sometimes it can look like imperialism by other means. So what is the real role of Global South feminisms in this debate in France and in French foreign policy and other public policies regarding the whole world? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laish. First of all, I would like to thank both of you for being here. I would like to especially thank Marie-Cécile because I read La Démocratie Feministe and it's a fantastic book, but it's really fantastic to have both of you here. And my question is kind of regarding to this question, because we often talk about how it's necessary to include women in the politics and diplomacy in different fields. But there's a difference between including them and actually hearing them and actually making sure that they're making a difference in those fields. So I would like to know what are your points of views, what are your perspectives in about how effective those policies that you've been talking about are when it comes to diplomacy in France, when it comes to politics in the world. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Marie-Cécile and Julie, for the insightful talks. My question is about, I would like to hear reflections about the future of feminist foreign policy in view of, we were talking about this yesterday about how right-wing conservative governments have been, winning elections, including most recently in various countries that have declared feminist foreign policy. So Colombia being the more recent example, but Chile, we all know that, and Sweden. And how do you see this? And also, considering your perspective on toxic masculinity and the connections with conservative governments. This is one question. The second question is about how to engage and react to also something that we were talking about yesterday, the cooptation of feminist languages by conservative movements, issues of reproductive rights, fertility, and their rebranding and reshaping with a conservative perspective on family rights, and how do you see potential reactions to that? And Tiago, if you excuse me for a moment, I will switch to Portuguese. a Marie-Cécile, a Julie, a gente estava participando ontem de um evento de um dia inteiro que foi apoiado pela Embaixada da França, chamado Diplomacia Feminista em Diálogo com a Sociedade Civil, em que a gente reuniu diversas organizações da sociedade civil brasileiras para conversar sobre política externa feminista e diplomacia feminista. Essa é uma iniciativa de um projeto de pesquisa que eu desenvolvo junto com a Bruna Soares, que é pós-doutoranda, com a Maria Gabriela, nossa assistente de pesquisa, Darcília, algumas alunas nossas de pós-graduação, e graduação, a Daniele também, PUC, e esse projeto se chama Observatoire de Política Externa Feminista Inclusiva, e nós queremos cada vez mais os estudantes da graduação próximos de nós, então, por favor, nos sigam nas redes, conversem conosco nos intervalos, nos procurem, porque nós temos sempre projetos de pesquisa e oportunidades de engajamento nessa temática para aqueles que tiverem interesse. Obrigada.
I will try to have an answer that is as global, as general as possible. It's not very easy to answer those very precise and interesting questions one after another, so I will try to have a general perspective. I would say that the role of feminism in public debate in France is key, and has become more and more key and more present, more and more influent. We have many ways and places by virtue of digital tools, not only there are many books now, many journals, many ways to express opinions and perspectives, and lobbying that have now a huge influence, including in diplomacy. And diplomacy is not only institutions. Diplomacy and influence abroad is not only what you can find in public policies in the stricto sensu, in the strict meaning. It's also talking in foreign media. It's also writing books, have your books translated. It's also being invited in foreign universities to talk about Black women perspective in feminism of France. I think, for example, of my friend Rokhaya Diallo. Maybe you know Rokhaya Diallo, maybe you don't know it, don't need to help. You can find her on the social medias. She's a Black woman in France, and she talks at the same time about anti-racism, not only against Black people, but also about minorities in general. And of course about feminism and anti-trans and so on. And she's not always invited in mainstream media, but you know who still have a look at French TV today. I don't know, only people I think have problems to seduce young people, but in social media, in foreign universities, in journals, in collected books, people like her, she's not, there are many examples, not only her. She has a very strong influence. She's interviewed in, she and others, but I think of Rokhaya because she's the first name that comes to my mind. She's interviewed in foreign journals, foreign dailies, talking about the fact that maybe in France we are still in a universalist perspective, but in the negative meaning of it. And it's changing very quickly. It's changing very quickly. Since Me Too, since Dominique Strauss-Kahn scandal, it's changing very quickly. by virtue of actions of young generation also. But your question is very your question and others are very pertinent because diplomacy, institutional diplomacy, is of course very important because it defines public policies and it's the way to talk with foreign governments. It's a way to have institutional influence all over the world, but influence is not only through the institutional tools. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's still a problem, but it's changing very quickly. And you know, many people, and not only in young generations, don't wait to be invited to talk. If you wait to be invited to raise your voice, the risk is big that you are not invited at all. So you create your own media, you tell your own story, you build your own narrative, and today you can easily write articles on the internet. You can easily create your own blog, your own community. It's very and the public policies, governments, companies have to hear you, even if they don't think about you at the beginning. You are here, so they have to listen to you to take into account what you say, not necessarily, but you are here and it's changing very quick. But it's still not perfect, I agree with you. Concerning how to fight toxic masculinity, how to address it in international relations, I would say it's one of the main problems of today and tomorrow. I don't have the answer, but we have to take it very seriously because it's what I would call in French a rouleau compresseur. I don't know what it is, but you know, like a bulldozer. It's like a bulldozer, and it's not only put the clock back, as I said, sorry if I repeat myself, it's not only put the clock back because we have been too far with the rights, and you know, the feminists want to take all the place, and they don't take all the place, they have a small place. It's not only that, it's destroying people's lives, it's refusing to share resources, refusing to share money, refusing to share tables in the bookshops. There are some writers in France who say, feminist books is very annoying. I don't know why Mona Chollet, for example, who wrote the bestseller Witches, sorcière, bestseller writer. I don't know why people buy her books. So why people buy your books? You know, they don't want to share resources, money, power, influence. It's not only that they think feminist activism is to influence, that they don't want to share with women. Not only women, but also men who don't think like them, Black men, Arab people in France, or minority. They want to stay a small minority. That's why I was talking about endogamy, entre soi. Entre soi, it means endogamy. We are very small minority of people who share all the influent positions in government, in the media, and so on. And they refuse to share the resources. So, how do we do with that? I don't have the answer, but what I'm sure of is that when I say we, people who want to work for human rights and women's rights and everybody's rights, to be aware of this danger, and not to stay in safe places. maybe it's a bit provocative when I say it this way. But safe places when we stay in our ambulance, in our entre-soi, in our communities, of course it's comfortable, but it's not sufficient. And I don't have the answer to the question now, but I'm sure that it's key for the future, not only for the topic we are talking about today, which is human rights, people's rights, human rights, but also for the future of the planet, the field of climate change, in the field of inequalities, in the field of wars. Let's see the world today. People who are proud to be so competent, they're so valuable in their positions, the only who are skilled to supervise the world. They begin wars they are not able to end. Sorry, I have an American perspective all the time, but it's also the case of Russia. It's also the case of all other places in the world. So the future of our humanity is at stake tomorrow and today also. And toxic masculinity is one of the main frames we have to keep in mind, and we have to think about to build public policies of tomorrow. It's not the very precise answer, but for me, it's key to act and to see the world with gender conscious glasses. I don't remember the question from your side.
Okay, it's about the future of feminist foreign policies in face of right-wing backlash.
Backlash, of course, we live in a backlash era, but there's another way to put it, that we live in an era of confrontation of two models. It's not the only way to read the world today. The feminist and anti-feminist perspective is not the only way to read the world today, but it's one of the main ways in my view, because many things derive from that. It's a confrontation, because feminists are fought, they are attacked, they have to face very violent disposals and policies, etc. But they are also strong. And it's because they are strong, because they have a strong influence, that they are so much attacked. So it's kind of confrontation of two models. I don't know actually, I don't know what to say. Masculinists want to silence us. They want to create fear. They want to prevent us from acting. In French, we say sidération. They want to block us because we are so frightened and so finding the most accurate phrase to describe it, like as if we were frozen because as if we were frozen because we are so shocked that we don't act anymore. This is their goal, and it's not going to work. So after the moment of consideration comes the moment of reaction, the backlash of the backlash. And we have many resources for that. We have academic resources, we have know-how, we have local initiatives. You know, yesterday I was talking about the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement, which is a Western movement. At the beginning, it was the Western movement, then it spread all over the world, but Me Too did not come magically. It came because there were before feminist movements in other places of the world, and notably in Latin America. No Me Too without the mobilizations in the 2010, 2015 in Argentina, in Brazil, and elsewhere in Asia, in India, etc. So there is a circulation of influences, a circulation of know-how, a circulation of knowledge that we can still rely on to tell those people and to show those people that we are not frozen in incineration.
Thank you. Vou esperar que a Isabelina está nossa aqui, então vou começar com a outra pergunta. Global South or Global North, what our foreign minister recently wrote in a paper, and it was translated in many languages, including Portuguese. He said he believed there are no such things, global north, global south, because he said that nowadays alliances, they are made around some values and not based on geography. So for instance, and I can say clearly, I guess, that nowadays United States of America, they would align very well with Argentina, and it's north and south. Or let's say, I don't know how you consider China and Russia, for instance, which belong to the North Hemisphere, but sometimes they say they are developed on the way, I don't know how to put them, but it's really based on, okay, this topic, for this issue, I will make an alliance with this one and this one, for this topic with another. So it's all multi, I don't know the word. You have so many levels. For instance, I participated in the G20, and I could really tell you that China and Saudi Arabia, for instance, sometimes they would be more, in what I consider advanced, but more likely to defend women's rights than Italy sometimes, or the US. So now it's useful sometimes to use these concepts of global north, global south, but it doesn't work fully anymore, I would say. And when you question when are Black people, indigenous people heard, well, this is why we also defend multilateralism, because we believe so far in those fora where all the countries would have one voice for each country. It's possible in the UN, it's not everywhere the case, but still in the UN. And so when some countries would attack multilateralism, they also attack the rights to the least heard, least rich to be heard. So now, and also talking about feminism, Colombia, Mexico, they're also very much into it so far, until maybe the next election, we don't know. Morocco is going to hold the next conference on feminist diplomacy. Maybe it's a facade, maybe it's just an act, but I don't believe it's a Eurocentric, also from a French perspective, universal perspective, etc. Maybe I'm based, but yes, there are women everywhere, and individuals everywhere, and everybody deserves the same rights. So for me, it's not geographically, but yes, it's a common concern, and this is why we always try to have people from the South in our alliance, in our advocacy actions. Obviously, Brazil has not officially signed any feminist declaration, but in the facts, they defend women's rights. on the sexual reproductive rights, it's not very clear, but against violence, obviously, the care economy also, Brazil is very vocal. And it's very important, obviously, to not give this impression that it's just a European action. And here, what the OPFI also, I found it interesting because you don't use the word feminist, you use the word política externa inclusiva.
Feminista inclusiva.
Feminista inclusiva. Não.
Lutamos muito por isso.
Okay. Because sometimes the only word of feminist is scary. And when you say inclusive or you just want equal rights, then people say, yes, okay, yes, that I am in favor of. But feminist, no, it's too extreme. So we don't know which word to use because we don't want to scare people off our country. But this is the right word, right? And about day-to-day toxicity, and how can you promote feminist approach if in your own organization, be it a ministry or an NGO, for instance, if internally you don't respect basic values, basic behavior. For instance, it's not an advice, but it's something that I try to promote, and it's linked to the coherence that Marie-Cécile mentioned, not public policy coherence, but personal coherence. And I find it very difficult in the long run to fight against your own personal coherence. If on the outside you're supposed to promote that human rights approach, and in the inside of the organization you accept sexist comments, or if you let people interrupt each other, is this kind of behavior. I think in the long run it would be difficult from the outside to promote a human rights approach, because in the inside you are not being coherent. So this is what I wanted to compliment about the future. For me, it's too difficult. I would like to be optimistic and to believe in multilateralism, in voting, and people educate themselves, not ficar entre si, essa endogamia que ela falou. I would like to be optimistic and believe that the money is not going to win it all, but let's see. It depends on us, I guess. Thank you.
Maybe two additional comments. I was thinking over when Julie was talking. The word feminicide is the word feminicide is the word coming from non-Western feminisms. Global South or Latin America or South America. Now it's in the Western dictionaries. It's a word coming from the field, from ordinary people that Gloria Steinem talked about, saying that they taught her feminism. So it comes from local experiences, local demonstrations, local narratives. Now it's a word that many people in the world, including in Western countries, know what it refers. Killing a woman or a girl because she's a woman or a girl. And the second comment is that I was talking previously about the coherence of public policy. And maybe if one country, be it in the north or in the south, in the west or in the east, implements cross-cutting approach in the next government, taking gender into account. Every public policy should be implemented, should be evaluated, assessed through the gender perspective. For example, creating a gender-conscious office in the Prime Minister institution. And every public policy should first be thought and implemented and voted through this perspective. What does it do? What does this policy do to women, but also to boys, to men, to women, to girls, to everybody, whatever the gender? And then, and we have that in France, but it's not always implemented. Assess the impact of public policies. We have that in Parliament, and sometimes researchers are called to make this assessment. Such an initiative could be kind of impetus for other governments, because in the media we talked about it, and we try to, what are you talking about? In some municipalities in my country, there is such a gender-conscious approach for the public sphere for urban policies. What urban policies do to women and girls? What urban policies do to little girls in schools? They changed the way the playgrounds are organized. Boys playing football in the center of the playground, and the girls trying to find a small space. Or boys who don't want to play football have to find a small space outside the main place, which is devoted to football. I speak about that to you in the country of football or soccer. And in urban spaces, more generally in Paris, in Lyon, in Strasbourg, they try to think, okay, our new urban policy, what will it do to women when there is a lack of public lights? Well, people, not only women, but people who may feel vulnerable, don't take some bus lines because there is a lack of lights, or because it's too isolated from the center of the city. So they try to change it, taking gender into account, and what they discovered was that it benefited to all. When we target a group of people who is particularly fragile, you try to change things, and you see that it benefits to everybody. So a gender-conscious approach, which would be cross-cutting, would be the first step to change everything step by step. It can be a perspective for the future at a local or at a national level. In Colombia, also, they do it in some cities to make public transportation more affordable, not only from the economic perspective, but also for women and vulnerable men. And they did it also in some cities in India. In India also, they try to, in some cities, they try to change public policies devoted to public toilets. In my country, it's something that you never think about toilets, because it was only available for men, but not for all men, but for men in some areas. In other areas, there are no public toilets, so it's a really big problem for everybody, and particularly for girls and women. In some African countries, you have the same problem. When in schools there is no public toilets, girls don't go to school, or because they don't want to be confronted with the problem outside public toilets. So, we have a lot to learn from every country in the world, and many public policies, and sometimes very local, target girls and women or vulnerable people and benefit to all. So when we have a gender approach, gender-conscious approach, and the more cross-cutting it is, the more mainstream it can be. and can be impetus or can be an impetus for other countries. But we have to make it known everywhere. That was something that was coming to my mind when I'm thinking about your questions.
Bom, nossas guest speakers têm um compromisso na sequência, né? They have an appointment. Então, tenho certeza que essa conversa continuaria por ainda mais muitas horas. São muitas experiências, né? De muitos países, né? Na aplicação, né? Das lentes, né? Das lentes de gênero no desenho de políticas públicas, né? E na avaliação de políticas públicas. Então, tenho certeza que a gente poderia continuar essa conversa por mais 2 horas, mas infelizmente, né? Enfim, fica o contato, né? Agradecendo já a professora Paula pela ponte, né? E está encerrada a nossa palestra de encerramento. Na sequência, as exposições vão dar continuidade à nossa semana de PPPI, então aqui é um encerramento solene, mas as atividades seguem ainda ao longo da tarde. Então, muito obrigado, né? Merci beaucoup a Marie-Cécile e Julie Maraval por esse grande momento para nós, docentes e discentes do Instituto de Relações do Departamento de Relações Internacionais.
Preciso encerrar a gravação aqui, será? Não estava gravando, não? Não. Sim? Encerraram?